Well, welcome everyone to Together, a higher ed podcast where we bring you stories, insights, and experiences from voices across higher education. I'm Chase Hagood, the Vice Provost for Student Success here at the University of Utah. Today is our guest. Our guest is, I should say, Dr. Ruth Watkins. And Ruth, I'm so delighted that you're willing to sit down and chat with us about higher ed and your experiences in higher ed and just an amazing set of perspectives that you bring to our viewers and listeners. And whenever I sit down with you, I've said this to a couple of other folks, but I mean it every time. I learn something new. I learn a different approach or a different way to think about things. And I treasure those relationships and conversations. So thank you for being willing to sit down with us today.
You know, I'm going to guess I'm going to learn some new things too. And those are the best conversations. So thanks for the privilege of being with you.
Well, I'm just glad. I'm glad always to see you, and I'm glad that you're here today. So I thought, Ruth, if you could introduce yourself. I know your work. A lot of folks know your work, but where you are today, the work that you're leading, you just tell us a little bit about that, and then I may pepper in a couple of questions along the way.
Sure. Well, I'm a very fortunate person. I have the opportunity to lead Strada Education Foundation's work in post-secondary education. What we do at Strada is all about strengthening the connection between education and opportunity. Now, you might well ask, what does that mean exactly? So what we're all about at Strada is thinking many people enter into post-secondary education after high school of all kinds, and they come for many reasons. But at the center of just about everybody's reason is access to meaningful work, a purposeful career, and a choice-filled life. And what we want to do at Strada is help more people attain that goal, certainly with a strong focus on economic mobility and stability through education after high school. What a joyful mission it is to be part of that.
It's incredible. And having seen the work of Strada, and now you're on campus with us today because we're engaged in a partnership with Strada, which we're delighted about. We might get to part of that in terms of how the University of Utah can do some new and exciting things in the world of kind of moving beyond completion and thinking about work-based kinds of work and projects with our students. That last part really strikes me as you were describing Strada, a choice-filled life. You talk a little bit about that in terms of, because social mobility, I think a lot of folks think they understand, okay, well, that means that folks are able to move from perhaps working class or maybe lower middle class into middle class and beyond. Can you talk a little bit about what Strada means, what you mean by choice-filled?
Yes. So, I think when we look at what happens to our students after they're with us, they complete their credential degree, then what we hope happens for them, it won't all be the same. We don't want to suggest that everyone needs to think about, can I make the largest amount of money possible?
Yeah.
But we do believe, and our own research supports this, that until you reach a certain economic threshold, you really do not have very many choices and options in life. So our goal is to say meaningful, purposeful work, teachers, social workers, and all fields of study can deliver that outcome. We want to be sure that people are able to attain that economic threshold that allows them to engage with community, to have meaningful and purposeful work that matters to them, that meets their needs for their family and for themselves. And we know that won't be the same for everybody, and thank heavens it won't be the same for everybody, because we need lots of different kinds of talent. But we want to be sure that we're preparing students for those lives and giving them the best possible opportunities to attain those outcomes.
It's certainly, hearing you describe it, Ruth, it's a powerful kind of mission, right? I mean, the idea that that's individual by individual by individual, it cuts against the grain, perhaps, of a perception that higher ed is, the input is students come and they make their way through gen ed, and then the upper division, their program of study, and then they're out the other door. It pushes against that, right? If I'm hearing you correctly, it says no. In fact, we should see the individual student, right? Honor what their hopes and dreams are, and then meet them there.
Yes.
Do I have that right?
I think you do. That was well said, Chase. I think if you think about history in higher ed, we spent decades focused on access, and that remains important, but I think that vision was a bit incomplete. because we had the idea that if we opened the door, that was enough, that people could come in. And then we began to see access without completion as a hollow promise. We have spent the last 15 or 20 years sharply focused on raising our completion rates. Very important and crucial. I think now we're at another juncture, and that is saying, in aggregate, completing a bachelor's degree creates earnings opportunities and opens career doors for people. But aggregate doesn't tell the story of the individual. And when we look at individuals, there are a significant number of people that finish a bachelor's degree that don't gain that economic mobility and stability, that don't get a career opportunity that required a degree. So we're really, at Strada, focused pretty sharply on what can we do during a program of study to help make sure more of our graduates actually attain that outcome beyond completion. And I know you're a champion of this because I can see your work and you're doing lots of things to try to help more students get those outcomes.
Well, like you, I feel really privileged and fortunate to be doing the work that I'm doing and to be surrounded by just really amazing people who care deeply, and their passion is evident in everything they do here at the University of Utah, and then connected with peers across the country, right, who care very deeply. I'd love to back up if we can and ask, how did you get interested in higher ed? I mean, one of the most, I'll put it this way as a frame, I think one of the most interesting things, like from a sociological standpoint, is, so many of us work through PhDs or what have you, and then the journey takes us in all these various different directions, right? And one of the passions that I have is hearing from individuals about what that path looked like for you. And I know that our listeners and viewers who know you and know your work would love to hear that from your perspective. Like, what brought you to higher ed? Tell us a little bit about what that journey has looked like and meant, both the successes and even some of the challenges.
So get ready, Chase, because I'm going to turn that question back on you because I love the stories. The stories actually, in some ways, have all contributed to what we're doing today. And I think mine has. So these are not stories I tell very often because they're very atypical for somebody who has the opportunities that I've had, particularly to become a faculty member and then a university leader in a variety of different roles. So as an undergraduate, I started college because it was what I was supposed to do, but I didn't really have a plan. And I think it's pretty unusual for somebody who ultimately becomes a university president to actually transfer not once but twice as an undergraduate and actually quit school as an undergraduate for a period of time. So I'm one of those many people who took 6 years to complete a bachelor's degree with a year off in between and not one transfer but two. So I grew up in a little tiny town in Iowa, and I experimented with all three public institutions in the state of Iowa before I did finally earn a degree. Thank you, University of Northern Iowa.
Awesome.
I started at Iowa State, transferred to Iowa, stopped for a while. And that stop for a while was one of the most important things that happened to me. And I'll tell you why.
Please.
I got a job. I started out and I was working at a summer camp like many other college students. And everybody else went back to college and I didn't go. It was my big rebellious moment, and which was a really fun and great idea until about November 1st, at which point, what is anyone doing in that particular climate at a summer camp after everyone else has gone back to college?
Yeah.
I wound up getting a job in a school system with kids with disabilities, communication disabilities, and it was such an enlightening experience for me. I had work-based learning experience. I was engaged with kids and parents, and so many parents were so concerned about their kids and their kids' development. And they were asking questions like, why is this happening? What can I do about it? What will happen to my child? Will they be able to go to college? What will become of them? With this, whether it was autism or stuttering, a hearing impairment, other communication problems. So I became very, very interested in this, read a lot, learned a lot, went back to school, and was so interested in pursuing that field of study. And I had quite an edge on my fellow students because I'd had that experience.
Sure.
So I got back to school and I had the wonderful good fortune of a couple faculty members that said, hey, you're really bright. You should think about a graduate degree. And when somebody says that to you, it changes the way you see yourself. And then they paired it with opening some doors and opportunities for me. And then after that, I was very swiftly able to pursue. I got an NIH fellowship, a National Institutes of Health fellowship for a doctoral program, and was able to work on answering some of those questions that those parents were asking me. So I think a couple of very powerful lessons from that.
Yeah.
Work-based learning changes everything, particularly when you compare it with an academic opportunity. And then someone in your life saying to you, hey, you have potential. You should expand your vision a little bit here about what you could do, and let me help you figure out how to do that. It's a life-changing experience that I think shaped my opportunities and certainly shaped the things that have happened to me since.
So, Ruth, I feel like I've long admired your leadership and your work. There are parts of that story I'd never heard before.
Yeah,
And
it's a little embarrassing to be a university president that quit school as an undergraduate.
I think
you don't hear that story very often.
I think it's amazing. I think it's truly amazing.
All the stats were against me, Chase, by all predictors.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, you're living proof that, I mean, I had a conversation just recently with somebody about transfer. And they were like, oh, well, transfer students should just, once they arrive at an institution, they should just simply become the student at the university. And it's like, well, there's a lot of research. Jason Taylor, who you know well, who leads in that field. The research doesn't tell us that. The research tells us that there's so many, and for you to have done it twice to accomplish getting over those barriers, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing it. And then you become a faculty member.
Oh, you didn't answer yours, though.
I thought we were going to skip over it.
Give me a nugget from your past story.
Well, I grew up in rural North Alabama, and from as far back as I can remember, both my parents, neither who went to college. The seed was there from the earliest memories that me and my sister both were going to go to college. They didn't know exactly how we were going to get into it. They didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but the expectation was there. And I was recently back at the University of North Alabama, a regional comprehensive that's growing, fastest growing institution in the state of Alabama. Roar Lions. And I had faculty mentors like you who said, you're really bright. Like, do you know that about yourself? Like, I was a history major, and my academic advisor, I can remember on day one of orientation, was like, yeah, you think you're going to be a history major, you'll be back next week and you'll change. They have to read a lot. You won't like that. I was like, well, we'll see. And I was the rare student that day one, I know my major, I'm going to be history, and it never changed. All the way through to a PhD. And
that is unusual.
Right? I never transferred, but being a first-gen kid from the working class who selected, I'm going to be a history major, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the discipline. I fell in love with asking those kind of questions about the past that help inform where we are, and maybe even some historians shy away from it, but where we might go next. And all along the way, it was this thing of higher ed was like how we do that then for other people. I think having been first gen, and a mentor of mine long ago described it as like, well, first gen students are the ones who show up, who know that there's a game happening, and everybody else seems to have the rule book, but you're going to have to figure out the rules while you're playing the game. And that resonated so strongly with me, and having lived part of that along the way, inspired the work, and it just kind of continues on.
Yes. Chase, did you feel a strong sense of belonging as an undergraduate, or did you have to discover that along the way? Did that begin to grow over time?
I think it's a good question, because all the things that we focus on now in higher ed, for me it was, and I'm going to turn that one back around on you in a second as well. So I think for me it was junior year, so it took some time, because I was commuting from my parents' home, about a 45-minute drive, all 4 years, through summers. And it was when I got involved with Habitat for Humanity and met President Carter and First Lady Carter building a house in LaGrange, Georgia on a summer work-based kind of thing. So I met those peers who were committed to thinking about affordable housing in the rural South. And student government. Yeah. The student government was in that last year, actually. And it was kind of like everybody else already knew each other, but I was like, I'm going to do student government because I think the commuter students on this campus aren't getting represented. And I'm going to throw my hat in and we're going to see what this works out like. And it was just amazing. It was an opportunity to kind of refine skills, and people wouldn't believe it now, but for me to open my mouth and kind of step into a leadership role and governance in a way that was like, no, like this additional kind of population of folks, this group of individuals aren't being represented in shared governance, and we should be.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting because it's a story that says it took you a little while to find your fit.
Mm-hmm.
You stayed with it.
Yeah.
Well, until then. And then what is it that we could all be doing to help more people find that faster?
Yeah.
You know, certainly their pathway, their interest in what they want to pursue, but also just that sense that there is a place for them here, that they belong, that they're connected. And I know in my own experience, those first two institutions, I just never quite found that. It is not the institution's fault. I think it was likely my own maturity and the experiences. But when I went back, I found that fit instantly, and felt very connected and very motivated and very, purpose driven, I guess, at that point. So similar to your story, it was more like that third year when that clicked. And I think a lot of the work we do is how do we help more people find that pathway that's right for them as early as possible in their educational career? Because a lot of people, I had a wonderful safety net from family, and it sounds like you did too, people that were there for you. Many people just don't have that sort of safety net, and if it's 2 or 3 years before they find that fit, that's too long to ask them to wait.
Right. How much of yours, like from your story, Ruth, how much of it do you feel like that fit matched up with like interest? Because you described it just now as like the purpose, right? And it kind of clicked. So you'd had that work-based experience. You described it as a moment of rebelliousness. So I'm wondering how family and supporters and friends responded to, where's Ruth? Why is Ruth not? So if you want to talk about that, we'd welcome it. But like how much of that academic interest or just the interest in communication disorders and exceptionalities that you brought back with you out of the work-based experience, that then the click happened? Because like, I'm really interested in this, and so are those folks.
It's a very good question, because I don't know how much of that I would have been able to find earlier. I really did need to connect it to, that sort of seeing it in real life and seeing the impact that inability to communicate effectively was having on kids and their development and their progress academically, and what a devastating and difficult thing that was for relationships and social interactions and for families and attachment. So that, definitely was a powerful driver. I do think some of the work that we're doing at Strada, I think as we start to think about what are the keys to better outcomes for more students, what do we see as the pillars of this work? What would change this for more people? There really are 5 of these keys to success that we think are vital. One of them that touches on this, actually several of them touch on this conversation, but there are 3 maybe that I would highlight. One of them is that sort of education to career guidance and education to career coaching. That ability to early in your program have someone say, you have a broad interest in this area, or you've expressed some interest in these fields, or you have some aptitudes here. Here's sort of a range of things, careers that are out there, and we can actually look together at alums who have pursued this pathway. What are they doing today? And let's think about whether that's interesting to you. And is there a salary on the other side of that that's going to meet your needs to support yourself and your family, or whatever your interests are? So there's some of those key, we think, coaching and guidance conversations that could help at the beginning, and I think that would have helped me. We also know that work-based learning, that ability to connect with an internship, even a short micro-internship at the beginning and maybe a longer experience later, we have very concrete evidence that people who can get a paid internship in particular have better employment and earnings outcomes, more likelihood to stay in school and finish. So that kind of ability to connect with work. And then I think another crucial variable to discuss is affordability. I have the advantage of being a bit more senior. And so when I first went to college as a happy 17-year-old in the fall of 1979, it was a pretty affordable experience. I mean, college was not so expensive.
Yep.
We know that this is an important variable, that individuals are making financial choices and they're asking about the return on investment. So all the actions that we can take to make the experience as affordable as possible will help more people. And I bet you have a story about affordability as well. But those are three areas: that early coaching, a work-based learning experience or several of them, and or a variety of experiences that can create that learning for people. And then the affordability factor, which does matter. So I think if I think about, some of the things that sort of shaped that interest for me, some of it isn't a perfect science. And I actually think, Chase, very few people are like you that say, I want to be a historian.
Yeah.
I'm interested in history. I'm going. I mean, good for you. I think it would be interesting to try to figure out how you must have had a high school teacher or something that was hugely formative that kind of showed you that pathway. Many of us need someone to help us see the path.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think equally, and so I appreciate the way in which Strada is doing the work and your leadership of Strada, which, I think if you think about it in terms of its timeline, your experiences leading up to that, and you suggested it earlier, all of our experiences leading up to where we are at present are informing like where we see the weaknesses in the systems.
Yeah.
And where we see the barriers, and where we see, if we open that door just a little bit wider, on the other side of it is a lot of opportunities for far more people, right? And then linking, as you described earlier, both access completion and then what happens after that completion. And should there, in fact, be a through line that connects those? Yeah. It was for me a high school teacher who said, I would say that their pedagogy and their approach to teaching, which equally is a kind of passion. I want to chat with you a little bit about teaching and faculty's role in success from your perspective as well. But I would say that the class was like, you got to read this book to be successful. And there were a lot of folks who took that as like, having been a history faculty member, well, that's boring, right? The whole thing is boring. The lecture is boring. The reading is boring. But she took me aside one day and was kind of like, what you wrote in this essay, where did that come from? That wasn't from this reading. I was like, yeah, well, I looked up a couple of other things. And she was kind of like, wait a second. And from that was born, and then I met it with similar kind of faculty members who, class sizes were small. They really cared. It was clear. Yeah. And the rest of it was just kind of like, you're on your way, because they were there as kind of guardrails to say, you make this choice and we can help you with these grad school applications, and this is how you figure out the program and all of that.
That is a good story, I think, Chase, because what that teacher did was see you differently.
Sure. And as an individual.
As a person. And called that out and said, I see you. I see the work you're doing. I see that you're actually interested in something. I want to nurture that and expand on it. And that is really powerful.
I agree.
Really powerful.
I mean, you look back over your shoulder at all the people at various junctures, be they a teacher, a mentor, a colleague that says, hey, have you thought about, outside your frame of reference, have you thought about that? If I can, I'd love to press you a little bit, not just on the rebellious phase, but I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind.
It's pretty minor rebellion in the big picture.
Fair enough. But those folks along your path, faculty, mentors, colleagues, students, right, if we're open to it, who can teach us so much. You talk about a couple of those folks along the way, where, without them, perhaps, the Ruth Watkins that is today would be a different person.
I feel so fortunate to have had so many great opportunities to learn from the people around me. And certainly the University of Utah has been a wonderful place for me to open the door for me and give me a chance to lead as provost or senior vice president for academic affairs, and then as president. And before that, of course, at the University of Illinois, I had many really remarkable models of leadership. And I'm so glad to have a conversation about faculty. So I'll just mention a few things.
Please, yeah.
But I think in some ways, the big picture point for everyone who's listening to you talk about what you're trying to do here on this campus is to remember and see that they have a role in the success of the people around them. Every one of us has scores of opportunities every single day to see the people around us and to help raise them up. Students absolutely at the center of what we do every day. So we got to think first about them, but their colleagues too, who are serving students and engaging students. And, you know, I think about the very first leadership job I had at the University of Illinois. I actually tried to turn it down. I had just gotten tenure, and the dean was trying to recruit me to be an associate dean. And I remember thinking, things are going so well in my own work, and it's too soon to do this, right? And she said to me, I know you think that now, but we actually really need you right now. And you're also a kind of person that is going to get bored with just that after a while. I can see that you can see the landscape at a different lens, and you have a lot to offer. And she was right. Like the next day I went back and I accepted the job, and it's kind of started a whole path. And it was kind of great that she did that, because I kind of wonder what would have happened had she not. And then, then I got the opportunity then to work in the provost's office as the undergraduate education person for the University of Illinois, and worked with several different provosts and chancellors in that time. And I really learned a lot from watching different models of how you mobilize people around a shared agenda, how you build a shared agenda and move people toward it. And then the next job I had was Dean of Arts and Sciences, Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Illinois, where I really learned a lot. Of all the jobs I've had, that was probably the biggest learning, and I'll tell you a few things about it. Please say more,
yeah.
So
please.
I took that job just as 2008, which I'm sure to any listener today seems like eons ago. But what was happening in the world then was essentially an international financial crisis. Really frightening time with the mortgage crisis and banks failing and big institutional financial challenges and budget cuts. And that pretty much happened across the nation. I took the job as Dean of Arts and Sciences, and that college, I started with about a $20+ million structural deficit on top of this financial crisis. So you're now questioning my wisdom. Like, what is wrong with this person?
I'm having like a breaking out in a sweat when I think about, Ruth is taking this job, and 2008 had me, and now I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and as it turned out, it was the single best move of my career from the perspective of we needed this is a large college, about 700 faculty at the time, and 50 different academic units. So you've got everything from chemistry to biology to history to languages to statistics and English and history and all points in between. All the crucial stuff in the university, right? Yeah. But to mobilize a group of people around a pretty significant change, very important unit for the rest of the campus and for the students in their own right in studying those fields, we needed to make some pretty significant changes. So it was a really powerful learning opportunity for me to say, the work that happens here, scholarship and education both, are absolutely at the heart of this institution. We are crucial, and we're going to have to do some things differently, both to innovate and create new opportunities during this time of change and to figure out how to manage our finances. So the things I learned then, people will support what they help create. Like, I could spend a lot of time poring over the data, looking at the numbers, and try to impose solutions. Not a good idea. We need to create the solutions together and solve those problems together. So what we did in that job was create something called the Strategic Advisory Group, and we called them the STAR team, which maybe wasn't the best idea, but we did it anyway. Yeah. So, and we took 15 of the department chairs that were thought leaders, respected by their peers, and also had large units and, had a pretty good view of what was going on. So think chemistry, English, history, and represented all the social sciences, humanities, sciences. And all the difficult decisions that we needed to make We opened all the books, shared all the information, 100% transparent, clear, spent a lot of time. It isn't what you don't know that'll hurt you, it's what you think you know that isn't right. And so
Sure.
the first part of this was just broad education for all of us. Where are the students? Where are the enrollments? Where are the expenses? Where are our innovative practices? How could we do things differently? And then we began to move through a series of difficult decisions together. At the end of the day, of course, I had to own the decisions.
Right.
But I did not set up the framework, the guiding principles. They did. We did it together. And we were able to navigate that very significant change because it was a shared agenda and a shared solution. And I am absolutely certain that I never would have survived it had I gone off with my CFO in the college and solved this problem, even if we would have gotten to many of the same decisions.
Right.
But it was the fact that we charted a path of dramatic change together. And I think that, for me, there were some moments in that I thought, wow, this is going to be a miracle if we all make it. And I think the college got a bit smaller. Faculty really were part of the change, helped innovate, create new approaches. Really wonderful things happened from some teaching innovations, some new approaches on advising and student support, and definitely fiscal responsibility while we were at it. So
Nice.
it was a very good learning experience for me. They they took a risk on me in that job. They really did. So I owe them for that.
Well, no doubt it paid off for the University of Illinois. In there, Ruth, you described that ability, and I'm wondering if you could say more about it, the ability to, I would describe it as kind of like setting the table and making sure the right people are at the table, and then ensuring that those folks stay at the table.
Yeah.
That the leader is there to motivate and keep the energy high, keep the people attentive to it. And it's kind of like, no, you can't wander away just yet. We're not dismissed yet. That we're all, the rest of us are still sitting at the table. Was that part of the journey there at Illinois?
Yes,
definitely. And then how did that, like as you moved to provost at the University of Utah and then to president of the University of Utah and now at Strada, you talk a little bit about your strategy set as you do that. Like, because I hear you describe it, your legend looms large at this institution. We missed each other by a matter of weeks, I think.
Yes.
But I think that's one of the things that I regularly hear. The keen ability to bring people together and say, okay, I understand that, you might not want to be here. There could be a number of things, right? A number of excuses, a number of really legitimate reasons that folks don't want to see change or they don't want to see.
Right.
And you've described some of it there at Illinois. You talk a little bit about what it takes from your experience to not just get people to the table initially, but keep them there.
Yeah. So certainly you've touched on them, I think, Chase, and one of them is you have to have energy and optimism and be inspiring. You have to identify your shared values and your common goals. And good people will see things differently. That's absolutely true. If you can return to the center of what is it that we all want this same thing. We want to be the strongest, best college we can. We want innovation and positive outcomes for students. We're going to return to that so that when we see the path to how to get there differently, we can return to that shared value. So I think there's a couple things there about inspiring, motivating, centering on what are we really trying to do here. Mm-hmm. I think that in that particular example, the stakes were pretty high. So I really had no problem with anybody drifting off. Nobody missed a thing. They were all there. Yeah. Part of that was I spent a lot of that time listening, not talking, genuinely learning about them and about, because when you're in the provost's office, the way you see things turns out to be not quite right as it is on the ground in the dean's office. Like that was a good lesson for me too. Like it's one thing to be in a slightly more protected environment of a provost's office and then to get out just a little closer to the action. And I imagine I was never a department chair, so I imagine it's even harder at the department chair. Like you're really close to the action. Yep. But being able to say, I have a lot to actually learn here too, genuinely. And the leader has the responsibility to kind of set the boundary conditions, as in, here's our shared goals, and this is we have to get to this answer. These are the non-negotiables, like the answers the questions we have to answer. But up between those two things, I am listening to you. We are going to chart this together, and I am genuinely giving you some power here. I'm not walking out of the room either.
Right.
But I am not. It's not like I already know the answer, and I just want you to parrot back.
Get there already, right?
Because as it turned out, some of the ideas I had were absolutely wrong. Like the things we came to together were genuinely better. Most of the time when people see that, they will stay with you toward it. And I think one other, and you have to then live it. Like you really do.
Sure.
You have to like give over power and, towards like the part that I couldn't negotiate on was we have to solve these problems. But I am absolutely with you on figuring out what the answers are to solving those problems. And I am going to give you latitude to be part of this solution. The other thing I would say that I think is absolutely critical if you're trying to move and drive a change process, and I learned this from my English department chair, who was, I think it'd be okay to say, a little bit of a curmudgeon at times. And
this is brand new information that some of us in the humanities, as we age into it, would say, "Wait a second now, we've been doing this thing this way for 30 years. What are you talking about?"
Well, and we'd worked together quite a bit, and became quite good friends. And there was one day when I left a meeting, and I was like, "Wow, that was kind of discouraging." I'm a pretty cheerful kind of person. And I ran into him walking across the quad in Illinois. And he said, "How are you?" Like that was kind of unusual, right? Because usually you don't tell people, you just say fine. And,
Yeah.
And I said, "Gosh, actually, I'm a little bit worried about this right now." And he said, "Oh, no, not you. You are relentlessly cheerful. And we count on you for that." And I thought, well, okay, you're right. That's
your role. That's the role that you're playing for this team.
I can sure say, I'm kind of concerned about this, but I have full confidence that we have the ability to bring forward a solution. And remembering that people are looking to you as the leader for those kind of signals, and that they see you as a person who believes in them that way, it's a very important thing, I think, for faculty. And in the faculty world, I have met thousands and thousands of faculty members.
Sure, yeah.
And I have met almost no one who doesn't care about their work or the quality of their work or their students. The commitment to ideas and knowledge and the advancement of knowledge and doing work that matters and investing in the success of students and student stories. Not everybody is a great fit for every student, but I think that capacity to say, I'm invested in this effort and I care is pretty universal. I do not see people who are not committed to the mission. I see people who are very committed. So engaging them in the ideas and the solutions it's like your most crucial resource.
Right. I mean, it's that passion, right? Behind some of the disagreement lies perhaps a deep well of passion and commitment.
And your story and mine tell us that when those people are important people in our lives, really important people in our lives.
Yep.
Of all the interactions we have, there's a lot of different kinds of people that can serve those functions and roles. And truthfully, when you're a student, you don't know who's what. Like, I remember at the time trying to disentangle what's an assistant professor or associate professor.
Right.
Or a staff person or director or advisor. It's great. Like, put it all in one category of people that care and are committed to the success of students. I think our job as leaders is to give those people the tools, those keys to success that can help them help students. But I see an awful lot of people out here that could be mobilized more effectively towards this shared effort.
I want to, on that shared effort piece, the ability, as you describe it, to listen, not as I hear you describe it, and as I've watched you and come to know you in your role at Strada, And again, folks who remind me pretty frequently about your approach to leadership, which is one of the reasons I was thrilled when you said, "Yeah, I'm going to be on campus, and I'll sit down and talk about change and innovation and how we do the work." Tell me if I've got this right from your perspective, that leadership is really, and you just touched on it, that the ability to listen, to understand, and to learn, not listen while listening then, which is more just an intake of information and opinion, to then counter, to then lay down, which, for a lot of folks who come up through academics and the faculty, we're trained to do that, right? There's a bit of unlearning in that space around, well, here's my dissertation defense. Here are the core set of ideas that I'm going to add to the field, and I'm going to defend them over the course of a career. And if the career takes you then into administrative work, there's a part of that lingers, right? And what I know of you and hearing you just now describe, well, that listening in some ways counteracts and combats, but it takes effort to listen in that way. Is that right? I mean, has that been your
Yes. I
experience?
mean, I wish I were better at it, but I try.
Yeah.
And I think
Well,
it's,
there are a lot of folks who think that you are and
Yeah.
have seen you do it really well.
well, it's a good goal. I think the most interesting thing about all this is the opportunity to learn from other people. And we're all kind of on this shared journey of learning. I think those of us that figured out how to never leave school are kind of like you,
Right.
me,
Yeah.
many other people
Yep.
that work at the university. We like that part of it. And so I do think you're right that sometimes when you're listening to people, you have a lot of competing things going on in your head
Sure.
as a leader. Because in your mind, you're thinking, I got this huge problem that I have to solve, and this person is not complying with my plan for how to solve it. and you can...
They could just get on board with the plan,
they could
right?
just get on board and get moving. We
Yep.
can get this done faster.
Right.
And that's tempting. And
Sure.
I can't for a moment think that I haven't done that. And I think the question becomes, like, people sometimes think it will be faster if they just say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to go. And I actually think it winds up not being faster. I think it winds up taking much longer, and it's probably less good, because this fact that people do support what they help create, that the shared solution will often be more informed and more effective than any one, because we're all coming at these challenges from our own perspectives. And in a big campus like the University of Utah or the University of Illinois, your part of it really well, but that doesn't mirror the whole thing. It doesn't capture everyone's story. So the actual fastest path to change might be it will take longer to solution, but it might be a much better solution that allows you to get more people in it and behind it and with you. And then once you get moving, it goes. So I think it's kind of a lifelong quest to be a good listener and a good integrator. And none of that says if people are saying things that are absolutely counterfactual that somebody shouldn't point that out.
Right.
It's a matter of, like, how do you want to go into that conversation? Because I suspect I've said a few things that weren't quite right. And the people that you remember most are the ones that kind of try to show you what might be incomplete or flawed about the way you're looking at a problem. And you can come together to a better solution. So, and none of this is to say that any of that's perfect. Sometimes things are absolutely urgent and on fire, and you just have to say, folks, we got to go today. And then it's on the leader to explain why.
Yeah.
Why I have heard you, but we have to go. We have to move now. So, one size doesn't fit all on these challenges, but
Sure.
I do genuinely, I want to be, it's not overly humble, it's just appropriate humility to say no one person could possibly
Yeah.
be able to design all the solutions.
Right.
It just isn't, it's a complex place with a lot going on.
Yeah, I was going to say that the complexity of where we sit today in higher ed, especially public higher ed, seems to be calling out for that kind of inclusive solution seeking.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the question, if I can, as we come to a close. The question we ask everybody who's willing to stop by, and that's, and there's going to be a little bit of noise. I don't think I gave you a heads up on that, but our board is going to move on us in a very lovely kind of style, because it reminds me of a train station. How do we create, from your perspective and your experiences, how do we create lasting, transformative change together? Like, how do we do it? And we've talked a lot about it, but if there are things that you would add to it, or there are things that there are things that we should know from what you've seen other folks do, from what you've led, especially now, like where we sit in the present. How do we do it?
I love the question. So I think what I might say is, let's pick up on the theme of the day, which is listening. And painful as it can be sometimes, I think we might want to do a better job of listening to what the public is saying about higher education, and how the public is really asking questions about value and outcomes. And I think that we could become stronger and better if, instead of taking that question as a negative or an offensive thing that makes us think we should do a public opinion campaign, because we should try to move that view. That
question of value.
Right. To say, if the public is saying, we're not so sure higher ed is going to pay off for us, we're not so sure it's worth the cost or the investment, I think it is important for us, instead of to say, well, of course it is. Let's look at the data. It might be wiser for us in higher ed to say, let's examine some of the things that we think should be better, could be better. What can we do differently? How can we understand what's behind that question? And really tackle, how can we help more students achieve those careers, meaning, purpose, choice-filled lives, and economic mobility? We can kind of circle back, and there is no harm in listening. In fact, it will help us chart real transformative change, to say, what are students looking for today? What do students need? And then what are the things that we know we can do to help meet them, and address the questions that they have, and truly listen to those issues. Think about the changes we can make. And then I do believe that it takes together. I love the theme because I really do believe people support what they help create. And let the wise people of this institution help you chart that transformative change.
Well, I'll only add to that, and I think I'll get an affirmation, and then the external partners, right?
Oh,
I mean, the beauty of the partnership between, say, a University of Utah and Strada, University of Utah and living inside the University Innovation Alliance, the AAU, and the wonderful partnerships that can thrive within it to think about solving complex problems. Okay, you've handled that piece of it before. How did you do it, and how did it succeed? And listening, right, when somebody shares those things back with you.
And, of course, you've got a community of supporters that want you to be successful here. Don't forget your philanthropic partners, your donor community, your legislative partners, everybody here who has a stake in the success of the students who come here and the institution as a whole. So that kind of theme of listening and charting together, transformative change, very powerful. You are lights out, Chase. I think there's such a bright future ahead here.
Well, I appreciate that. The one thing that I have found is that the love of this university, it runs red and deep.
Yes.
For very, very good reasons.
Well, go Utah.
Go Utah. It's a great way to close this out. Thank you, Ruth Watkins, for being willing to sit down and chat with us. Thank you, viewers, listeners, for tuning in. Tune in next time for Together, a Higher Ed podcast.